So we did our initial closures, and now we're going to do our 2 extra credit, well, 3 extra credit options. The first is our skirt hook and bar. So they function the same essentially as the wire hook and bar, but if you see these are larger and they're very flat, you'll often see these at the waistband of pants and skirts. So they're often also called a pant or a skirt hook. And it's a bar here because, you know, it's a long flat one. So this is also kind of a bar, but it's in the wire family. So we still more or less refer to it as an eye, but you could call this a wire bar as well. A wire eye technically is going to be rounded. So you'll have your 2 little curves here, but instead of going across this way, it'll make a little loop out. So those function the same way with the hook part. You'll probably, the eye instead of the little bar gives it just a little bit more kind of wiggle room, just allows a little bit more kind of ease because you're not right on top of it. So instead of closing like this, it's going to close like this. So that's your difference. All right, so our skirt hook and bar, again, because we are doing hand stitching, I've already got my needle threaded. I haven't trimmed my tail. Let me do that now. All right, so we're going to start this the way that we've started all of them. Oops, I didn't get that other side of the snap sewn on because it's the exact same as this one. All right, so we start. Let's get focused here, camera. Here we go. So we start by taking our little bite on top of the fabric. So our knot is on top and not underneath. Or you could have just gone straight down and come straight up. I've got a little loop here I don't like because my threads weren't even. So I'm just fixing that. All right, so that's how that was done. So now I'll take another little bite, you know, because we put our initial knot in, then we make a new knot. Needle loop, put my needle through, collapse that down. All right, now we're ready to get started. And all these closures are essentially the same thing. We'll come up inside the hole. We're going to pass from the inside to the outside, not across from hole to hole. We'll do at least 3 passes. Oops. We hooked on our hook. All right, one more. And if you want, you can go all the way through and come back up in the other one. So our next, so I did my 3 passes there. We like working from the inside to outside, so I did put that one on the outside. Now I come up through the hole. Like I said, if you want to go all the way through, and then come back up, you can do that either way, or if you can kind of do it in one motion, that's fine as well. Okay, 2 and 3. All right, so that's those 2 holes. We've got 3 more. So if you wanted to tie a little knot here, you could, or you can just move on to your next hole. The more knots you tie, the more secure that closure is going to be. So we're on the inside here. Pass number 1, number 2, and number 3. Now we'll travel underneath to the next hole. Those are so small they're hard to kind of come up inside, but this is what it looks like on the back because we're traveling. So I just came up from under that hole without going through the fabric because I couldn't just come up there. All right, so then we've got pass 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to travel underneath, come up through that last hole, pass 1, 2, and 3. Right, now we've sewn that on. In order to finish, we're going to tie our knot. So we come to the outside, take a bite out of the fabric, take another little bite to make a loop, and then there's that knot. Now, I do like to tie it off at each section, but I didn't. So just like we did with the snap, just to make it a little more secure, I'm going to pass back through to the other side. You could do this completely underneath or in between the layers. And I'm going to make one last knot just to make it extra secure. Little bite to make a loop, needle through the loop, collapse it down. My threads are uneven. I keep getting an extra loop. All right, pass through near the knot. Travel between the layers away from the knot to bury the tail. And then we trim. Okay, so there's our skirt hook. Now we need to do the skirt bar. All right, we start with our little bite to get our knot thread into the fabric, another little bite to make a loop, pass the needle through, collapse for a starter knot. Now the bar, I'm going to start inside the hole, and our 3 passes through each hole. Pass 1, pass 2, pass 3. Now it may be tempting to stitch this across from hole to hole, but again, that puts more thread on top to be interfered with, or like a longer piece of it, and that makes it a little looser and easier to be grabbed. So I don't feel it's as secure. All right, so I've done my 3 passes on each side. I do like to make a little knot before I travel down. Now you can travel down to the other side either underneath the layers or between them. If you can come out in one of those holes, that's great. You may not be able to, so just come out of the fabric and then come up from under the hole. Then we have pass 1, pass 2, pass 3, travel, pass 1, pass 2, pass 3, and our final knot. I pulled that up like that to try to even out my threads because they had gotten off again. All right, needle into the fabric near the knot, travel away to bury the tail, and clip. Okay, so there is our Pant or skirt hook and eye. This thread has gotten a little short, so we'll rethread our needle. Okay, so we have 2 more extra credit moments. So we have our 4-hole button. We did our 2-hole button over here. It's the same essential action. It feels weird to put this in between these two and separate them, but that's the space I have. So again, we start with our initial knot, create a starter knot, oh hello. So what most likely just happened here is my thread got a little twisted, so it didn't want to collapse cleanly. So I'm just going to try to reverse that a little bit. Okay, there's my loop I created. All right. Much better. Okay. So now, just like we did with the 2-hole button, we'll come up through one of the holes. Now we have 2 choices here. We can go across to the other hole and then just do those 2, come up and then do these 2, so we have 2 parallel lines, or you can make an X. I do not have a preference. I think that some technicians and some costume designers may have a preference. There might be times where you might look at period research to see what they might have done in the time period. I just tend to do an X, not for any particular reason. You can do either pattern and it's going to be fine. I'm just going to be looking for your multi passes. I'll be looking for your shank underneath and proper knot tying. All right, so there's pass number 1. And remember, with the buttons, we're kind of going in and out in almost a V shape, right? So we'll come up through the hole. Stop grabbing the fabric. Now when we come back through this hole, we want to angle that in toward the center because we want to keep all of our stitches kind of close underneath. Thread's not wanting to cooperate today, is it? That's pass number 2. You see that little extra thread there? It's because they were uneven, so I pulled one. All right, coming up. Angle in. All right, that's 3 passes. So now when I come up, I'm going to come up through one of the 2 holes that we haven't done anything in. And we will repeat. Pass 1. Pass 2. And pass 3. So now the last pass, See, when I feel the thread, it's hard to describe. When I feel the threads try to be, when it seems like it's not moving smoothly through the fabric, sometimes I'll kind of stop and pull it back out so that when it comes back down, it's acting properly. All right, so that's the X pattern. Like I said, you could do 2 parallel lines. Either will be perfectly fine. All right, so now that I've done 3 passes through both sets of holes, I'll come up in the middle and remain under the button, not come out through one of the holes. I will make my reinforcing shank. So we'd loop under, pass the needle through. I'll do this twice. If you want to keep with your consistencies of 3, you can do that. So now once I'm done, I'll come under here, take my little bite to make my loop, and finish that off. I very often do 2 knots. I know that my knots are probably overkill, but again, I would rather sew it on once and be done instead of having to continually replace that. If you only have 1 knot there, it's fine. I'm always probably going to do 2. All right, so now we just need to bury the tail. So I enter the fabric near the knot, travel away, come through, and clip. Okay, so those are our closures. We have one more little trick. So you may see on occasion at the top of a zipper something we call a thread loop. Sorry, my knot was not cooperating. You often will also see on the waistband, around the waist of dresses, especially if they have thin, more delicate belts that might want to go with them, you might see a thread loop is just like a little loop that's made out of knotted thread. A crocheted belt loop is the same thing, it's just longer, and you'll see it on the waistband at the side that act as belt loops. And you make these the same way regardless of which one you're doing. So if I want to make a thread loop, let's do it over here. I start the same way I start everything else. I get my knot established on the top side of the fabric. I come through and I make my second little starter knot. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do exactly like I'm about to do a starter knot, and it creates a loop. Now instead of passing my needle through the loop here, I'm going to take this loop, I'm going to reach through the loop with my fingers and take this thread here. Now I'm going to hold this thread steady, and when I pull the other half of the thread, it's going to collapse that down. Now I'm just going to repeat that action, right? So I'll come through the loop, pull that thread, hold that thread in place, and when I pull the loop, it's going to collapse the other side. You don't have to have this big of a loop. Let's see. All right, we'll go through, pull that thread. So what we're doing is we're making a little chain of knots here. And if you're doing a belt loop, you'll make it long enough that whatever belt you're using can go through it. If you're making a thread loop or a thread eye, then it just needs to be large. It just needs to be long enough like that for your hook to grab onto. The larger your hook, the longer this will need to be. The shorter your hook, smaller your hook, the shorter. So if I lay this down, I see that I'm about the same size as this, so I'm pretty much done. Now I'm going to show you something that will make you very sad. So if you're doing this little thread loop and you accidentally pull this thread, you undo the entire thing. Okay, so you don't want to pull back on that thread. All right, so let me do that again, and we'll actually complete it this time. Okay, little bite to make a loop. Instead of passing our needle through the loop, we reach through the loop, pull the other half of the thread, hold it in place, and pull, and that collapses the other side to make our little knots. So this thread over here, we're holding still pretty much. We're just creating more loops. And again, if you're doing a belt loop, this might be an inch to inch and a half long. For a thread loop, we only need about a quarter. Now, I showed you how to do it wrong, which is to pull this thread. Now, to finish this off, we're going to go back to what we did before. Now we do put the needle through the loop and pull it that way to make our last knot. Okay? Then we're going to lay this down, and right where it lays on the fabric, when we lay it down, that's where we're going to go back into the fabric. So now we just need to secure this end down. So we'll come right back up next to that. And we'll make our finishing knot. I'm going to make 2. And this is actually a little bigger than we need it to be, because if you look at this, so it's about the length of the eye, but it's the side, but it goes all the way to the side. We really only need it about that much. So I don't think that might be about a quarter of an inch. All right, so we finished. We insert, needle, travel, exit, clip to bury the tail. And now, right, so the regular wire hook and eye work that way. So now we've done a thread loop instead. And the reason you might do a thread loop is just if it's a little bit more delicate and you want something that kind of matches. So often you're just going to use matching thread for that. All right. I'm just going to sew this last half of the snap-on just for, just so that we're complete. So there we go. For your closures, as we saw on the last video, your required closures are the 2-hole button, the shank button, your wire hook and eye, and your snap. Again, with your snap, make sure that you orient the male and the female properly on the fabric. The female has the rounded, is thicker and more rounded. The male has the very flat edge. And then our extra credit is our skirt hook and eye, our 4-hole button, and the thread loop. You can do 1, 2, or all 3 of those. You don't have to do all of those extra credit options in order to get the extra credit. You just, whichever one or ones you do are the ones that I'll evaluate for extra credit. But you do have to complete all the required elements in order for the extra credit elements to count, right? So if you stitch the 4-hole button instead of the 2-hole button, then the 2-hole is the required element. So make sure that you do the correct one. So now you should be able to sew buttons on that come back off if you want to convert something from a button. Or now one of the closures we don't have on here, mostly because you can sew it on the machine, is Velcro. You'll often see Velcro as a closure option, especially when you have something that has to be what we call quick rigged. When that quick rigged means that you have, the costume has to come off the actor very, very quickly, and or has to go on the actor very, very quickly. So it just depends on that. I like to use snaps for that. Snaps are much faster to come apart than they are to close together. So some people might like to use Velcro. Velcro, I find the noise can be an issue, and it's just not my preferred closure option for me. But it's certainly something that works and can be used. But anyway, as far as these kind of closures, you now can replace those or repair them. You might, some snaps you'll find aren't so on snaps. They require a tool to set them in. That's a whole different ball game. I almost never use those because then it's so much harder to change them if you need to change them. So, but that's our closures. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 required elements. 1, 2, 3, 4 extra credits. Thank you very much.